I am Gladwell Otieno. I am the Executive Director of Africa Center for Open Governance, AfriCOG for short. We refer to it as AfriCOG. And I'm very happy to be hosting this launch of our latest report. As you already know, the title of the report is Highway Robbery, Budgeted Corruption and State Capture, a case study of infrastructure projects in Kenya. Today's program, we've got two main speakers, and then we have a Q&A and where we hope to have a lively discussion. And we've made about 45 minutes time for that discussion. We've planned about 2 hours for this, but if there should be a lot of interest, we are available for a little bit longer. So you know, we'll play it by ear. But in terms of the speakers, I'm doing the introduction, which will be followed by a presentation of the main report, and then a presentation by a discussant, which will take about 15 minutes. The main report will take about 30 minutes, the discussant, and then we'll open up the floor for question and answers. And then we'll have a launch of the report and closing remarks, and you will be provided with a link where you can download the report. So the report which we're launching today, Highway Robbery, Budgeted Corruption as State Capture. Budgeted corruption we've put in inverted commas, because it's a quote from somebody which I'll tell you about as I continue the introduction. Budgeted corruption as state capture, a case study of infrastructure spending under the Jubilee administration. Now, this report follows on a report in which we started what has now become a series, what has become a project. We looked into the issue of state capture and launched a report. If some of you will remember, a report called State Capture, inside Kenya's inability to fight corruption. We said inability, but we were well aware that it was more than just inability. So what we did was to look at the failed history of anti-corruption reforms and campaigns, and concluded that this failure lies in a phenomenon which is increasingly being described as state capture, not just in Kenya, but around the continent and indeed globally. And the report went into detail, obviously, in looking at the phenomenon of state capture. And a brief definition of it was could be a political project in which a well-organized elite network constructs a symbiotic relationship between the constitutional state and the parallel shadow state for its own benefit. So in this report on state capture, we saw the phenomenon of state capture as a situation in which the facade of a constitutional state is projected, but it is emptied of real substantive content. Regular elections are held, but the elections don't, the choice of the people has no real impact on the leaders which are chosen. Today, we're going to hear about how the elaborate public financial management system, which was set up under the Constitution of Kenya, which was passed in 2010, and really a globally exemplary system, I would say, as many of our systems are. I think we have, in terms of laws and institutions, an extremely elaborate facade built up. But when it comes to the actual practice of democracy, the practice of accountability, this is where the practice of anti-corruption, this is where we find failure. So we borrowed the concept of budgeted corruption, the phenomenon of budgeted corruption, from the former auditor of Kenya, Auditor General of Kenya, Edward Ouko, who left office last year, soon after the launch of the report. And I think because he was soon leaving office, he felt free to speak about what he saw as a phenomenon of budgeted corruption, through which the budget is inflated by monies that are earmarked to be stolen. And he characterized the budgeting process as a highway along which the main appropriations move, and then projects which are designed specifically to drain that budget as exit lanes. So this is where we get this image and the concept on which you know, a large part of the report has focused. At the time that we were doing the state capture launch, we did look at, you know, who is involved, who are the state capture elites, what's the impact they have on institutions and on society. And we asked, what's the origin for the seeming stability and resilience of state capture elites, even through political transitions? How are they able to save themselves from one regime to the next? We talked about the unspoken and implicit transition bargain that binds the capture elite, in that successor regimes will not go too hard and too far against their predecessors, at least not in any substantive way, unless you know, there's been a major breakdown. You'll see small fry being chased. You'll see cases being kept alive and never ever resolved. So we looked at emblematic cases which are well known to Kenyans, perhaps not as famous globally. And we do have an audience from other countries today. So so we'll try and keep the Kenyanisms down, but we looked at scandals such as the Goldenberg scandal, Anglo leasing scandal, most recently the Eurobond scandal, which sees the government unable to account for most of a $2 billion sovereign bond. And so we looked at all these scandals and looked at the tenacity of corruption, despite all the campaigns which are being proclaimed by successive regimes, most recently and extremely energetically by the current president, Kenyatta, and which has gone the way of most of all the other anti-corruption campaigns. They start with a great deal of breast beating and declarations, and they peter out quietly and with no substantial results. So today we're looking at the public financial management system and how that has been perhaps we'll find out during the course of this presentation, how that has also been hijacked by a small and corrupt elite. And we're very grateful to David Ndii. It's a great honor to have him, do this study with us. If David doesn't really need much of an introduction, so I really won't. I won't go into detail. But David is a well-known economist and public intellectual who studied at University of Nairobi and Oxford University. He's been active and instrumental in many parts of public life, and in the fight to secure accountability and to secure better performance by the government for the welfare of Kenyans. In many ways, he was instrumental in the development of the first economic plan of the government, which succeeded President Daniel Arap Moi's corrupt years of mismanagement and misrule in 2003. a plan which saw a great deal of improvement in Kenya's economic performance. But unfortunately, the plans of this government were again stymied by resurgent mega corruption in the form of Anglo leasing. David's also been instrumental in giving strategic leadership to the struggle for political accountability in providing strategic advice to the opposition, which unfortunately they followed up to an extent, but lost their will and lost their guts at the very end, which brings us to the situation which we see today, where former opposition and the former ruling party are banded together in an effort to subvert the constitution in the interest of maintaining power. So David is a public intellectual, and he's, as far as I'm concerned, one of our great national resources, and we're very, very proud to have him here today. So I'm going to hand over to him without further ado. I can see the attendance has already leapt to 100, and I expect it will be going up. Oh, there are 106, well, including us. So I'll hand over to David now, who will take us through to his presentation on highway robbery, budgeted corruption as state capture. David, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Gladwell. I will share my screen because I have a couple of slides, and I hope that I will not hook up. Okay. Yeah, I think I should be good, yeah. All right. I am going to do my best to speak you through this report. Some of the people who reviewed it initially, including Gladwell here, their feedback was that it's very technical. I was not alive to that because obviously as an economist, it's not as technical as this can get. I thought I had really kept it very simple, but they still came back and said it's very technical. Try to sort of make it a little more sort of palatable. I hope it is. So I think it has to be read slowly because it's got lots of numbers and it's about budgets and numbers. So I'll try and convey that flavor. But I think the most important thing is the context. One of the things I would like to start with before I talk about the report that Gladwell did not highlight is that probably more than anything else over the last 25 or so years, I've spent most of the work I've done in public domain has been on public financial management reforms. Starting with the early 90s, we started after the adoption of multi-party. During the one-party system, there was really no public financial management system because Parliament was just a rubber stamp for the executive. There was no public scrutiny or even disclosure requirements of the budget. The Auditor General was emasculated like many supposedly independent institutions. In fact, at some point, the Auditor General's security of tenure had been removed. Parliament did not even have a budget committee. It had been abolished. So I think for two successive parliaments, we did a lot of work with other people like Wachira Maina and Betty Maina, who's a CS now, and Oloa Ringo and others, to strengthen the parliamentary role in terms of oversight. But it took a very, very long time, including establishing institutions like the Institute of Economic Affairs, which would then be able to support the opposition in terms of research and analysis, because Parliament did not provide that capacity. And actually, we were quite successful in getting public finance scrutiny and public participation becoming much more sort of mainstreamed, as opposed to being, the budget used to be a secret, a government secret, which was only unveiled on budget day, and that's the last thing that people heard about it. such that by about, I think, 2000, we actually managed to push through Parliament something called the Fiscal Management Act, which opened up the budget to scrutiny against the much protestations by particularly the Treasury mandarins, many of who, you know, are my professional colleagues, and after that, I think our professional relationship never recovered. The fact that we sort of made them accountable to Parliament, and they now had to come to Parliament. They had to publish disclosure reports. So that particular act was made redundant by the Constitution 2010, and because we then put that process, all of it, in the Constitution in Chapter 12, because our previous Constitution did not have a public finance chapter. It actually had very brief provisions in terms of public finance. So we did that in the Constitution. We did other things. We strengthened the Auditor General. We split the Auditor General and the controller of the budget, so that we could have the controller do ex-ante control and do more frequent reporting, and have the Auditor General do audits at the end of the year. The purpose of more frequent reporting by the controller to Parliament was perhaps so that Parliament could act before the horse had bolted, before the accusation was that all audit function was purely post-mortems. So for me, I think I have probably done as much as can be done personally. And I think we've done as much as we can do to strengthen and create a best practice public financial management system as far as the governance dimensions of it is concerned. And of course, thereafter, there was a Public Financial Management Act, which was mandated by the Constitution. There was one which enacted. You do see, and you've seen a lot of attempt by the Treasury mandarins and the people who are now trying to subvert the Constitution to claw back some of the sort of accountability mechanisms that have been put in the Constitution to undermine disclosure in their efforts to sort of keep the system under control. So I am giving that background to say, so when Gladwell asked me how could we follow up on the state capture report that had been done by Washira, I suggested that, look, we ought to look at, we have a state-of-the-art public financial management system, architecture, so to speak. If we have a state-of-the-art public financial act, a real Rolls Royce of institutions and processes and disclosure requirements and public participation, why is it that the Jubilee administration, which took over and is the first one to implement the new constitution, has done the most egregious corruption that we have ever seen? How can that happen when we have the most elaborate public financial management architecture that you can imagine? So that, I thought that elaborate was to provide the context of what this. I said, I'm going to look at the numbers because I was already picking up some of these things casually, because I sort of following and seeing where the lapses are. I said, when Edward Ouko spoke about budgeted corruption, I found that very intriguing, because it's just that it gave a name to something that I was grappling with. You know, you got this heuristic, or that's something that the budget, the public financial management system, has been captured by the corruption cartel. So it has been subverted. We saw the electoral system subverted, for instance, completely, that we put in place after the new constitution in 2010. We saw it subverted completely in 2017. And I was drawing a parallel. I said, looking something which looks like the public financial management architecture has also been subjected to the same kind of subversion. And you begin to see this, for instance, just with the financial sort of accounting system, IFMIS leaking like a sieve. This is supposed to be a state-of-the-art financial control system and budgeting and system, and money was just being used to sort of siphon money out of the treasury. They said it looks like we actually have we may have a much more severe problem. So, and that's what this study began to look at one particular area, which of course we know is where a lot of the money goes, which is infrastructure. And the other side of that, of course, we know that we have huge amount of debt, and I'll come to the report. And again, we've seen a lot of debt and a lot of disconnect with the economy and other things. So I thought, let's try and sort of bring these things together. So you're looking at this as a first sort of preliminary investigation of, do we actually have a public financial management system or architecture that is fit for purpose? So I'll briefly, provide the context, as I said. If you look at, I've got two data points here, 2012 and 2018. 2012 is just before Jubilee came to power. 2018 is at the end of their first term. And you want to look at what has happened to, no, I need to move this so that I can actually see the numbers myself. If you look at the numbers that have increased the most since Jubilee came to power in absolute terms is things related to debt. Revenue has increased 90% cumulatively, debt service 280%. Foreign debt alone 870%. In other words, when Jubilee took over, foreign debt, interest on foreign debt was only 9 billion a year the last year. By 2018, it was 84 billion. But of course, the domestic one has grown more because the domestic debt is more expensive. When they took over, the interest was 17.6 billion. By 2018, 240 billion. And these numbers keep going up. Debt itself has gone up 200% from 1.4 up to this point was 4.8 trillion. It is now 7, I believe 7.5 as we speak. But the economy, in nominal terms, has only expanded 104 terms, 38% when you adjust for inflation. And then if you look at the bottom, two things which have got negative numbers: revenue as a percentage of GDP and investment as a percentage of GDP. So those two things, when you borrow money for investment, public investment, you're borrowing money for public investment, crowding private investment. Yeah, you're building infrastructure so that the private sector can also invest and expand the economy. And then that private investment, crowding in private investment and private business, then expands your tax base. And that tax base, you are then able to use that to pay your debt. That's the business model. So you borrow to finance catalytic private investments like infrastructure. That crowds in private investment. Private investment then expands the economy. You get a bigger piece of that pie, and then that is what you use to pay your debt. But now what you see is a situation where you're borrowing heavily. You are putting money in this public infrastructure, but in fact, your private investment is shrinking, and therefore your revenue also is shrinking. So your capacity to service that debt is actually falling, which is no surprise then that you can see that debt service as a percentage of revenue, and this is interest only, has more than doubled from 11% to 23%. So almost a quarter of revenue in 2018 was paying interest on debt. It is much more than that as we speak today. So these are important economic contexts, because those who know that I've been railing against this borrowing and infrastructure spending for a couple of years, and many people say that I was anti-progress because I'm preventing government from investing. And I said, look, before you get returns from those investments, you're going to have gone bankrupt. Because you always have to ask yourself, how do you pay for it? And many people actually were not paying attention to that. Anything you borrow and invest has to be able to pay. The next thing I provide in terms of context is actually to show exactly how that happened. This is a picture which shows analysis of GDP growth. You keep hearing that big growth numbers. You're saying the economy is growing by 5 to 6%, but at the same time, you're also hearing that people are in distress, businesses are shutting down. Every so often, people are showing me newspaper pages where there are 5 or 6 pages of things being auctioned, which have been repossessed from businesses that are unable to pay their debts. So on the one hand, in the real economy, you don't see growth, but on the other hand, the headline growth numbers, you are told we are growing but 5 or 6%. And this is actually related to what I am going to talk about. You're going to see it. What we see here is I have circled in dotted lines about from 2012 to 2015 at the top there. That was a contribution of private investment to growth. Yeah, you can see some private investment to growth. And then I have circled 2016 and 17 that figure has turned negative, that the private investment is no longer contributing to growth, even though the growth, which is a round circle, has remained at that number between 5 and 6%-ish. But if you look at its composition, private investment is not there. Even private consumption is shrinking. And the things which are contributing more is public investment and government consumption. In other words, what we are calling growth is actually consuming debt. It's a debt, it's deficit financing. It's actually just a deficit stimulus, so to speak, that is translating into headline growth numbers, but it is actually not contributing to what. So again, these already tells you that you have a problem with the productivity of the public investments that you are making. So if you're making public investments that are supposed to benefit the private economy, the private sector, whether you're talking about industries or farmers or the tourism sector, whoever it is, who then finds these new opportunities because you have infrastructure where you didn't have infrastructure before, or your infrastructure is more efficient and therefore their cost of business is going down. So it says that the investment that we've been making with all this borrowed money is not actually doing that. We are beginning to get the sense that it is not doing that. So we then are compelled to ask the following question. What have we done with the money that we are borrowing? Huge amounts of money. Just to give a sense of perspective, which is in the report, the national government has spent about 7 times more on development projects per county. If you take that money and divide it by county over that period, the review period I'm working with, is the first term of Jubilee, the first 4 years, it has spent 7 times as much as the county government, each county government. So if you go to a county, you should be seeing 7 times more national government development projects than county government ones. I mean, national government projects should really be just crowding out. So you should not, they should be all over the place. But I don't think there is any single county where people will tell you that the national government has done more than the county government. In fact, what you find is occasionally a celebrity project, like not too long ago, the county government of Makueni built a small hospital, 160 million shillings, and it was a big deal. And you look at, if the national government had spent the kind of money that you're talking about, we probably should have 5 or 6 of those in every county. Yeah, or more. So there's a disconnect between the projects that the government is doing and the amount of money borrowed. 6, it found 1.8 trillion. It is now 7 point something. So it has actually borrowed about 5.8, 5.9 trillion shillings. Where is it? Then you say, if so much money has been borrowed and spent and we can't see impact, how is this possible? Because that's what a public financial management system is supposed to do. It's a cycle where the budget at the planning stage is scrutinized, and then Parliament approves it, and then the executive executes. Then the Auditor General reports to Parliament on whether it was well spent, and those findings are factored into the next budget. And so over time, you expect a lot more scrutiny. The theory is if you have the power to scrutinize, we have the controller of the budget reporting to Parliament quarterly on execution of the budget, that the overall performance of public financial performance should improve. So the question is it that it's not improving, or is it improving and we are not seeing it? What is the system actually doing? So the study then looks at asking this hypothesis. If that's the situation, is then corruption budgeted? That this money is actually budgeted and there's a system of taking it out of the budget, as the Auditor General suggested? Because those are the questions that the Auditor General was trying to answer. He was trying to say what he has seen at the end of his term. It was a reflection. The reason why you have this sort of situation is because the budget system itself has been captured by corruption. If there is budgeted corruption, of course, that means, as I said, the PFM system has been captured by corruption cartels. And if the PFM system has been captured by the corruption cartels, and the public financial oversight is one of the core sort of pillars of democratic governance. You will recall that, in fact, the Magna Carta democratic reforms begins with no taxation without representation. And quite a few monarchs have been beheaded for this reason over the centuries. So if the democratic system cannot look after our money, it cannot hold the executive accountable for our taxes, then that in itself is a very fundamental failure of the democratic governance, because what then is it for? It has no meaning in terms of improving our lives. You elect people, they go to parliament, they make a lot of noise, they're frustrated, and every year we're getting poorer and poorer and more indebted. I think you can see that really the system is not, if it doesn't do this job, the public financial management system, it cannot actually do any other job. Or this is its most important function. There's no point spending money on it if it actually doesn't. There's no point hiring an auditor and paying an auditor every year if you keep losing more money and more money every other year. What's the purpose? And Parliament, its most important role is is an audit function. That's why the Auditor General reports to Parliament. So the way this is done is actually quite simple. What I did is I took 3 infrastructure sectors because they've been very active in terms of activity. We see it physically, we hear of it. Roads, electricity, and water. I was able to cover the first 4 years of Jubilee administration, because getting broken down data and properly reported is very difficult. Even just piecing together how much money has actually been spent, not budgeted. Because you get the budget every year, but what is budgeted is not what is spent. And getting actually reliable data, which is consistent over time, on what is actually spent per sector is actually quite difficult. And if you want to break it down to sectors. So, and it tends to, it's been improving. You can even see between these years. The main report, which reports this in a bit more detail, the sector reports, they've got a name, I've reported them. They've been improving over the years, but they are inconsistent also because they keep changing the reporting requirements and all of that. What I do, I would call it value for money expenditure analysis. I just look at what it's spent. And then I do that by doing some cost analysis and looking for cost parameters that you can use to tell you whether this is value for money. Doing a trend analysis, comparing the previous period of the previous government, using as a benchmark the first 4 years of the Grand Coalition government, and just some triangulation with very many sources, which I will highlight, because there are sort of some independent sources of data for some of these things, and you're able to sort of do some kind of eclectic analysis. So it's not audit, it's not a forensic audit, but the fact that we're able to find what I'm about to say just tells you how the magnitude of the kind of thing that we are dealing with. So I'll run through the findings quite quickly. I wouldn't go through all of them in detail. I just tell you what they are for each of the 3 sectors, and I'll highlight a few things. You can actually read the report. The report just shows how the analysis is done, but the findings are really what I highlight here. In those first 4 years of the Jubilee administration, which is my period of review, they spent 120% more than the Grand Coalition government over the same sort of period. Electricity sector spent 46% more. The road sector 51% more. Water 57% more. But the reason why the figure is much bigger is there's one big thing called the railway. Which is obviously not here. But if you take the railway out, you still get a figure which averages about 60%, 60-70% more than the previous government. So the question we want to ask, if they spend 60% more, if you factor in construction costs and all sorts of things, inflation, how do we actually see 60% more in terms of infrastructure output? Now, what do you see? First of all, although the Jubilee has been saying very loudly how they have done a mother of all road building projects, in reality, the amount of road projects in terms of kilometers that they've initiated themselves is actually just about the same as the Grand Coalition government. If you see the report, I actually had to go through all the data, do a database of all the roads since the Grand National Coalition, every road started, look at it, how long is it, how much the budget, how much was spent, and just doing that, a time series of that. And the Jubilee actually hasn't done any more than the Grand Coalition actually did. But what you see is that the cost of the road building has actually increased by something like, it's actually almost doubled. But within that doubling, you have to break it up into two components. Yeah, because it's not like and like. It's apples and oranges. If you take the cost per kilometer, it's nearly doubles, but it's apples and oranges. Why? Because what has been happening with Jubilee is a shift in the composition of the project portfolio from the normal roads, low, medium cost trunk roads connecting two towns out there, to very high cost, what you might call urban mega projects. Yeah. So you find that before Jubilee came, the only road which ever hit 300 million shillings per kilometer was Thika Road. But under Jubilee, you have a road which cost more than $1 billion shillings a kilometer. I think 1.2 billion shillings a kilometer. That's the Dongo Kundu something pass in Mombasa. So what you see is that you're seeing a portfolio shift where those sort of urban roads with interchanges and all manner of things, they are more and more of them in the portfolio. And there are fewer and fewer of they are consuming much more of the budget than the normal trunk roads that we would build, or rural access road to open up different parts of the country. But even after you take those out, and those are put, I think or you ask yourself, what economic logic is there that you spend on a short urban road of 1 or 2 kilometers with an interchange to improve traffic flow? You spend 3 billion on it. And that 3 billion shillings could actually build you something like a 40-50 kilometer road somewhere up in the North Rift, which can open up those regions and sort of improve the delivery of products. So you see all the time people putting in pictures of trucks stuck in the mud and they can't get product to market. But even after you remove that, there's a 20% cost increase, which works out to 16 million per kilometer, above what construction cost increase actually justifies, because the KNBS does provide a construction cost index on an annual basis. So you say, this is how much the actual costs went up. After you've taken care of those costs, and they're actually based on those projects, because KNBS collects the data from government, there is an increase, there's an unexplained 20% increase, which is 16 million per kilometer. And if you factor that, if you look at all the roads that they build and you do it on roads, this is about 50 billion shillings over the period I reviewed. And that works to over 700. Almost, if you're actually building roads at normal cost, you're talking about almost 800 kilometers of road, yeah, that you could have built with that money. That just the unexplained cost escalation over and above what is justified by what a BQ sort of would give you. So you've got two things going on. You've got money shifted to mega projects. And of course, you can sort of hypothesize that the reason people want mega projects is because they are more amenable to big bribes. Yeah, they are more complicated. You bring in big contractors. So if you are putting that money in rural access roads, that 5 to 10 billion shillings, and it's in about 20 road projects all over the country, I think it is much more difficult to aggregate the sort of and extract the kind of money out of the contractors as you would if you talk about a project which would cost 3 billion and then you double that to 6 billion. And of course, then you decide what it is that is shared between the contractor and whatever. So the size of the transaction, seem to be the ones which are driving what projects are done, as opposed to, and the distortion implied, the economic distortion is huge. So the budgeting of corruption here is in the projects is in the project selection. So projects with high economic return are left out, and what is put in the portfolio is projects with high corruption potential. That's the distortion. It's a very huge distortion. You don't see it physically, but you see these things, and Kenyans don't connect the dots. Why is it that all of a sudden we are doing all these very sophisticated peri-urban and peri-urban roads? Just actually around three, all of them are either around Nairobi, a couple in Mombasa, and I think 1 or 2 around Kisumu, and that's it. There might be a 1 or 2 in Karua or something like that. So that's what you see on the roads. Electricity is a whole lot of things going on there. Kenyans will recall that as soon as the government came into power, Jubilee government, they sort of proclaimed that they were going to increase power generation capacity by 5,000 megawatts. This meant fast tracking a lot of projects. The aim, if you had done that by 2016, we would have ended up with 6,800 megawatts of power. We do have a power planning system called the Least Cost Power Development Plan. And if you looked at the Least Cost Power Development Plan at the time, the projects they were fast tracking were, if you look at the demand forecast, when we would reach that kind of demand, was 8 to 12 years ahead, depending on the scenario. The low case, 8. So the best case, 8. The worst case, 12 years, depending on the growth. Power consumption follows sort of economic activity very closely. You can actually just use a straight line whatever to forecast. But at any rate, that LCPDP was revised shortly within that period, and it reduced the forecast, so that the kind of power generation capacity, we are talking 6,800 megawatts in 2016, is not actually required until 2037. Yeah, 21 years from now, 2037. But still, even the projects which are already underway have created an excess capacity of 47%, because we now have about 3,000 megawatts. It was 2,800 when I was writing, against a peak demand of less than 2,000 megawatts. Now, you ask, who would do this? What is it? There were all sorts of arguments saying, no, the SGR is going to use it. Investors are not coming because we don't have enough power. If you want big industries, you must guarantee them power. I'm not going to go into the details why all that is poppycock. But the main reason, I've given an example in that case study. If you take the Lamu coal plant, which didn't take off, if this plant had been built and not used, because investors actually get paid for capacity availability, making plant availability, the capacity charge alone would have earned the investor something like 15% return in dollar terms, guaranteed. Yeah. Now, if you consider that we are paying investors 7-8% on euro bonds, so what you're really saying is that this is really a bond so to speak, a high yield bond. They put in a plant. It doesn't have to be used, but the capacity charge is enough actually to give them a return than they would get by putting that money in alternative investments, even in this country. So you can see that this fast tracking was a way of budgeting all these sort of investors. This was investors would actually build the plants and then fold their hands and just make money from us, from our power, from our power tariff. Because once the plant is put on the power purchase, on a power purchase agreement, that power purchase agreement is money, whether the plant is being used or not. So you can see the incentive for investors to put in, especially at a time when the world is going green. Therefore, there are a lot of people out there who are doing things like coal plants, as AMO is going to be, who are going to be stranded with these technologies. So if they could find a place where they can offload these technologies, because they can no longer use them in some of the countries where they come from, this is a very good way to make money, a lot of money out of them. And you're still hearing the same noises about us going nuclear power. It's motivated by exactly the same kind of reason. The second thing is, which is very well known in Kenya, is called last mile connectivity. This is taking power to everyone, including Banyatas. There is a quote in the report where the CS for electricity, energy or electricity announced that they are going to bring you electricity whether you like it or not. You don't have to ask for it. You're just going to find them installing electricity in your premises. Pendem sipende, as we say in Swahili. And what this ended up doing is saddled KPLC with about 900,000 dormant accounts, 12 billion shillings in bad debts, because the people they were connecting were supposed to pay 15,000 shillings and they haven't paid. And I think this year, it's predicted in the report, because it was written a while back, that it was likely that a KPLC was going to make a loss this year, the first one in a very long time. And indeed, I think in the last 2 or 3 days, it's been reported that KPLC has made a loss of 3 billion shillings, the first one in 17 years. And this is the reason. This is a huge part of the reason. This last mile connectivity business is a huge part of the reason. If you look at the logic of the whole thing, you can actually see there was no appraisal. There was no sort of economic appraisal of this project, because if you look at the numbers for phase one, they say they spent 13.5 billion, some of it borrowed from AFDB, to connect 300,000 customers. Now that number works out to something like 49 billion shillings, 49,000 shillings per connection. Now, for 49,000 shillings per connection, you can get a state-of-the-art solar kit, plus accessories, plus bulbs, plus a TV. So if you are going to provide this, you should ask yourself, what is the alternative? What is the best alternative? In fact, the solar kits, if you go to the market, you can buy one for 20,000 shillings. And if this household is being asked to pay KPLC 15,000 shillings for a connection up to the door, and then they have to put the wiring in, and then be paying sort of tariff, what would you rather do? If you want electricity, would you rather do that or spend 20,000 shillings to get a plug and play kit, complete with phone charger, bulbs, everything is all paid, and then you have no bills? So clearly, if you are looking at providing power, it would have been so much cheaper to say, let's just sort of subsidize just solar power kits for low-income households or something like that. But you cannot say these evaluations. But that because that was not the purpose. The purpose of this was to sell transformers, to sell cable, to give people contracts to make those connections. The principal beneficiaries really were the vendors. This was a vendor-driven operation. Lots of top KPLC management were implicated in related corruption. I think there was quite a big purge thereafter, so this one actually just speaks for itself. The third item under whatever is transmission lines. I mean, if you go through the data, look at the government budget as what the government says it has spent. And then I was comparing that with the cost estimates of the same transmission lines by the LCPDP, which is actually done by external consultants. And they have itemized cost for the projects. And then you have the same projects itemized by KETRACO. And then you have the same projects budgeted by the government. And you can see that data, what the government has actually transferred, claims to have transferred to KETRACO to do these projects. And if you sort of go through those numbers, I come up with a discrepancy of 33 billion shillings between what is in the budget and what is actually, what has been, not in the budget, what's spent. And what the LCPDP actually says those projects should cost. And they are quite well costed. And I have sort of listed them there, they are there in the report. Now, geothermal, big business in Kenya. The big geothermal operation now is this Ndii field that GDC, the company that was created purposely to do geothermal development, as a special purpose vehicle. It's supposed to be developing 400 megawatts. When you look at its annual reports, it says it spent 65% of the money for that. But when you look at the output, only 45% of the target is met. They have money, by now they should have done more than half, because they've spent 65% of money, they should have probably close to 300 megawatts in terms of steam development. These are engineers, though they should know how to estimate these things quite well. But they spent 65%. Now, GDC inherited a portfolio, a field, which had been developed by Kengen in Olkaria when they were created. And if you look at, they're actually making money from those wells. And if you look at that revenue, I'm able to calculate how much does it cost, how much is the cost, because they have actually put them in their balance sheet as their assets. And if you look at those assets, they come to something like, and I think they're done at historical cost, they come at something like 90 million shillings per megawatt of power that they're generating, that they're using to generate to generate megawatts. Obviously, you generate power in kilowatt hours or megawatt hours, but yeah, it comes to about 90 million shillings per megawatt capacity that they have. Now, if you look at what they're doing in Ndii, they've done 170 megawatts capacity. And you look at the amount of money spent, it works out to 440 million shillings per megawatt capacity. I mean, that's almost 5 times. And this is despite the fact that in this funding, they borrowed from AFDB, they actually bought their own drilling rigs so that they can make it cheaper. But you don't see those cost savings, even though they have their own drilling rigs. You see 5 times the cost of what they have already done compared to what they inherited from Kengen. Yeah, so you're able to conjure what Kengen did and how much it cost, which is now in there's a transfer value in their books, and what they themselves are doing. And you ask yourself, is it that the Ndii field is much poorer? Is it that the wells are much more expensive to drill? Didn't you buy your own equipment so that you can make it cheaper? But then you read the newspapers and you hear that there is a corruption scandals where GDC was paying people to move rigs, private rigs, about 4 or 5 times, or double or 3 times what they should cost, what Kengen used to pay, despite the fact that their own rigs were idle. So they were using private rigs, they were paying people they paid some company, I think instead of 800, they paid them 1.7 million shillings per move or something like that. There's some scandal of that nature. So there's some shenanigans going on there. They were also funded to buy wellhead generators, which once you've sort of developed a wellhead generator is a sort of stopgap generator, which is put on the well and it generates power before you build a power plant. Still, there is no generation. So the question is, did they buy the wellhead generators or not? And why is there no generation?
It's a very interesting story of, you could read about the Silari field contract, because GDC borrowed money, the government borrowed money from the some German KfW, I think. And then they gave the contract to a phantom company. A very ridiculous thing, because this company is just a briefcase address in Hong Kong. And they disappeared with the money. I think they've been pursuing the bank which gave a guarantee and all some other things. And I think there might be a recovery. But the point is, Kenyans should not be conned. Kenyans cannot be conned on geothermal. We've been in this business for such a long time that we know who are the credible geothermal drilling companies out there in the world. I mean, we have the idea that we can be conned and pay off a briefcase company in the geothermal sector is very suspect. And if you read that story, you will see that it is very suspect. Finally, just in terms of a summary, you look at the amount of money in the budget spent over a 3-year period, which I was able to pin down. This is the money in the budget spent on geothermal from 14, 15, 17, 18, 3 years, 52 billion shillings. And if it cost KenGen, the Karua field, 90 million shillings per megawatt capacity, then when you take this money is equivalent to 580 million. That's what it should have added to the 633 we already have. So if we had spent this money properly, we would be talking about now having something like 1,100 or more, 1,200 most day actually, more than 1,200 megawatts of geothermal power. And you know, geothermal power is now contributing most of our base power. So if we actually spend this money properly, we would have sort of solved quite a big chunk of our power, sort of base power requirement, and we would actually not be talking about coal plants in Lamu and stuff like that, and nuclear power plants and all. I'm just on the money we've already spent. So in 3 years, all we have to show for that money is 170 megawatts capacity in Menengai under development, having spent 52 billion shillings, which would have been enough to double the geothermal capacity that we already have, just benchmarking on those. Even if you see the costs have gone up to maybe 100, 120, you're still talking maybe 400, 500 megawatts capacity that we could have done. Water. Now, I don't want to go too much into the Harold Kimarel sort of drama, because that's been the public domain. I just highlight one thing, that according to some journalists who looked at the public debt register, which has not yet been made public, it's supposed to be public, the recent update. The old one, I think going to 2015 is public. You can read it off the Treasury website. It looks like all the money that was supposed to be for the Harold dams that has not been built had actually been drawn. Because even by the time it's reflected in your debt, it actually means that it has been drawn. That's how it ends up in the public debt register, because you're now paying for the money and it's been drawn. So the question then becomes, and we know, of course, there are no dams. Were the dams simply front for commercial borrowing to fund the budget? And these things do happen, you know, where commercial borrowing to fund the budget is disguised as something else. Or perhaps the dam stalled and projects sort of went the way they did, and they decided to borrow the money anyway because they're desperate for money. We don't know, but there is a hugely untransparent thing to do with the Harold dam financing, which is not about the corruption in the projects, in the dams. It is actually a question of procurement of debt. There's a procurement of debt issue, a big one, which is bigger than the issue of the dams. If this is indeed true, that this money was drawn, it was borrowed in the guise of building dams. Some money was advanced to contractors. Some of it was frittered this way or the other, perhaps. But if the whole of the amount of money has been drawn and is now part of our public debt, there's a much, much bigger question that need to be asked. I also highlight that there is a parliamentary committee finding of 20 billion shillings lost installed big dam projects. These dam projects, you look at these dam projects, you read those reports on each one of them, and you ask yourself, when did we become this incompetent that every dam project stalls? Every big dam project has stalled. So there's something going on there. Whether the dams were meant to be completed or they were actually just meant as fronts to get money out, you begin to ask questions. But the most interesting thing, or the more sort of critical thing, or what you might call actually the smoking gun in the water sector, is you look at the amount of money spent over the review period. I was talking about 143 billion on water projects. And they said this money has been used to increase the access water from something like 40 to 60%. You do the calculation, 6 million people. So that works out to a capital cost of about 24,000 shillings per person. And then I go back and say, wait a minute, you do have actual data on government water projects and how much they cost. They provide, this is the cost of the project. This is the number of, the volume of water that you're going to do. This is the number of people that benefit. There are some benchmarks. And I provide some analysis there which shows that taking an average of about 5 projects with very diverse costs, because water projects vary a lot depending on what the source is, how far it is from whatever, how much damming is required and dredging and all manner of things. That those 5 projects you're talking about they range from about 3 or 4 billion to 3 or 4,000 per person's requirement of water, if it's some number, to almost 30,000. But the average is about 12,000, even without diversity. So they cover the broad diversity of projects that you would do. But if you look at the budget spent, it says the actual cost is actually double that. So you're saying if you have provided water for 6 million people, you should have done it at 70 billion, not 140 billion. So where did 70 billion go on average? Unless those other projects are way more expensive than this sample of projects that I have. And the sample of the projects I have is very representative of the big projects that we've been doing, the collector, Northern Collector, Tato, Ruiro 2, quite a few of the World Bank funded type projects, which I think are properly costed. More interesting is going forward is you read the water strategic plan where I'm getting these numbers from. And they now plan that up to 2022, they want to increase their access to sort of safe water from 60 to 80%. So they are going to provide 14 million more people with water at a cost, and they're asking for a budget of 496 billion shillings to do this. Now that works out to a capital cost of 36,000 shillings per person. Yeah. Now, if you work with 12,000 shillings per person, these 496 billion shillings is enough to provide water for 40 million people. So who does this kind of budgeting? And what's the purpose of inflating the costs? Obviously, when they go to negotiating the budget with the Treasury, they may not get the entire amount, but they're going to get a big chunk of it, where it's inflated by a huge margin. We ask about question money. So, but if you just look at this figure as it is, that it has been put in there in the strategic plan, the amount of money that should go to meet this water target by 2022, we are really looking at 330 billion shillings of budgeted corruption. Yeah. Taking this, even if you increase the cost, and I don't see how the smaller water projects tend to be cheaper. They don't have as complex engineering. It definitely, if you look at these people and decided to give every household, you take on a per capita basis. So look, the government is not going to provide, but here's a subsidy. If you have a household of 5, here's 60,000 shillings for you to provide yourself with water. I'm absolutely certain that he will actually do it at a cost lower than that, even if it's just roof harvesting with a tank. Anyway, but it is so irresponsible, the kind of budgeting that you see in the news. Who scrutinizes these figures? How do they get in there? These are professionals. You have engineers, you have QSs, You have PSs who are supposed to be overseeing these things. They're supposed to be experts in these fields, or they are able to hire experts. They have economists. What the hell is going on in this system? What happens in Parliament? The Parliament has a parliamentary budget office. They have research staff. If they have civil society organizations that are willing to work with them on these sort of things. What are all these people doing when these things like this are going through? So what are we to conclude from this? I think we see a fair amount of prima facie evidence that corruption is budgeted. There is 330 billion shillings of budgeted corruption in the water strategic plan, for example. So that I think that's the point that the Auditor General was making, and we are able to see it without doing audit. So since he had done lots of audits, I think he had seen a lot more of it than we have. Secondly, that the PFM system is really not fit for purpose, which was what I feared in the beginning, because really the fox is in charge of the hen house. You can't have a PFM system when it's the fox which is in charge of the hen house. And finally, I think given what we are looking at, it no longer makes sense to talk about corruption and anti-corruption things in legal, technical, managerial function. Let's strengthen this institution, let's tighten this law, let us do these things differently at a managerial level, because really what you're talking about is a fundamental failure of political accountability. This is just, as you said, it is a complete subversion of the system. The system has been repurposed. It has been completely repurposed for purposes of extracting public money for private gain. And that, I think, has very, very serious implications. And even talk about when you're talking about the sort of things we are seeing, where we can see that there is a reluctance of people to leave power. You can see why are they reluctant to leave power. If we can be able to arrive at these sort of observations by very sort of preliminary scrutiny, what if people leave power and some government is exactly determined to get to the bottom of this matter actually takes office? So it has very severe political implications. But I want to leave it there, not to go beyond that. I think that is the subject that of conversation that this report invites.
Thank you very much, David. I think we all need to sort of pause for breath, especially those of us who are hearing some of those figures for the first time of what you've been able to uncover through research. We were unable to extend our project to do actual investigation on the ground, but this was something that we had also wanted to do. So this is research into 3 sectors over a 4-year period of time. And as David says, if we've uncovered this level of wanton criminality and abuse, you know, what are we really dealing with here? So I want to thank you, David, for the work on this. And I'd like, before we go to the question and answer, to hear one example of work which has been done largely by a courageous individual and a small group of colleagues on the mayhem in the electricity sector as far as consumer rights and mistreatment of consumers is concerned. Sorry, David, for dropping the ball on the issue of public financial management, and I do need to mention your contribution to the to the creation of the chapter in the Constitution on the public financial management sector. So I'm looking forward to going into detail on some of these shocking facts and figures that David has given us here. Before we do that, we'll go to Gerotich Sei. Gerotich Sei is also well known to many of you, especially those of you who are active in social media. Gerotich rose to prominence in leading the Switch Off KPLC campaign against the electricity company and its mistreatment of consumers. Massive bills which we are unable to, which we simply are extorted into paying. We have, if we want to continue receiving electricity, we have to pay for those bills, except in the most extreme cases. So Gerotich and her colleagues started a social media campaign against the KPLC, and under hashtag switch off KPLC, which you all know. Gerotich has worked for 23 years in East, West, and Southern Africa in development programming and in humanitarian response, and she's a committed social and political justice activist. She's also recently run a crowdfunding campaign to respond to the need of people hit by the COVID crisis in different ways, economically and in terms of their health, under hashtag HumanityKE, where she's collected and distributed funds to people, especially in the slum areas, for whom no provision was made in terms of the loss of income due to the COVID crisis. So I'll give Gerotich the floor to briefly go through how the experiences of trying to counter capture in one sector through the switch off KPLC campaign. Gerotich.
Hello. Oh, I need to start my video. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you, Gerotich. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Gladwell, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Dr. Ndii. It's always a treat to listen to you when you elucidate on these matters that affect us so much as Kenyans. My name is Gerotich, as Gladwell has said. I am an active citizen. That's how I refer to myself, and I'm here just to reflect a little bit on our quest for energy justice in Kenya. Before I go any further, I would really like us just to take 30 seconds, 10 seconds maybe, just to think about the following. On the morning of Eid, a few months ago, a mother and her 3-month-old baby, this is down in the coast, Kwale County, were walking to the shops to go and buy some flour, some sugar, and some basic provisions to begin the celebrations at the end of the holy month of Ramadan. On the way back, Kenya Power pole with a live wire that had been dangerously laying around for several weeks at that point was in her path, and she stepped on it, and she and her 3-month-old baby were electrocuted to death. I think of an 8-year-old boy last year who was also electrocuted to death. He stepped on a live wire on his way home. He had been sent to the shops, and on his way back, he lost his life. I think of the numerous people who have lost their food in their freezers, in their fridges, who are unable to continue with their economic activities because of the continuous challenges that we have with the electricity sector in Kenya today. I think of a mother who lost 5 liters of breast milk. And as a mother myself, I know it's no mean feat to pump 5 liters of breast milk, assiduously store it at a certain temperature, and then Kenya Power fails on you and you lose all your milk. And perhaps she was on her way back to work and was leaving a nutritious, healthy stash of milk for her baby as she returned to her active duties after having had her baby. These are but many of the stories, horrible stories of loss experienced by Kenyan people in the hands of this dangerous, deadly, and corrupt electricity sector. In January 2018, and I must preface that I do not come from the energy sector, in January 2018, a few of us got together, rallied behind a particular lawyer who decided that he was going to take Kenya Power to court over a 10.1 billion shilling amount that was going to be recovered from electricity consumers, ostensibly because of droughts and fuel and the use of thermal diesel and all the usual excuses given to us by the Ministry of Energy. And so this group of us rallied around this lawyer. We all started to mobilize and educate on social media. And I coined the expression, the hashtag #SwitchOffKPLC. We gathered a lot of data. We went to court. Actually, there was a court order that stopped Kenya Power from collecting the 10.1 billion shillings from electricity consumers. And I will add that they did go ahead and ignore court orders, and they collected and retrieved illegally the 10.1 billion shillings from electricity consumers. But our campaign continued. We have two specific petitions in court that we have focused on since January and February 2018. And one of the petitions, petition 6 of 2018, looks at issues of consumer rights. We're looking at overbilling, fraudulent billing, dangerous service, faulty transformers, third-party vendor cartels. We're looking at issues of service where we're told to pay first and ask questions later. If we do not, we have our electricity lines cut off and so on and so forth. So this first petition actually looks at consumer rights. We look at access to information. We look at consumer protection, and we say we want our electricity bills to go down and we want to be protected. And in fact, the Constitution of Kenya in the 4th schedule allows for counties, and you know we have a system of devolution in Kenya, allows for each and every one of our 47 counties to handle a number of things, including electricity and its sale and distribution. However, in Kenya, we continue to see this de facto monopoly called Kenya Power, because there are no other distributors and sellers of electricity in Kenya today. So when our campaign team mention is one that focuses on what Dr. Ndii talked about at length. And what Dr. Ndii was referring to in terms of the independent power producers and the types of contracts that they have. These independent power producers, many of them have irregular contracts. And these irregular contracts, we highlighted about 20 of them, 20 IPPs in Petition 59. And we were saying the government needs to get to a point where these contracts are cancelled, where we stop seeing independent power producers come on board with their take or pay system, where we pay capacity charges whether we use their power or not. And so these two cases that were closed by private consent in 2018, we are still on a mission as the Switch Off KPLC team to reopen. We will not stop fighting for energy justice, because we know that energy is at the center of every single thing that we do. You know, when we reach out to the public and we say, look, Kenyans, you are actually funding corruption. We are funding corruption. We accept the tariff structures that are given to us. We look at our bills. We have all manner of levies that are thrown in. I have so many requests all the time coming in via social media, on WhatsApp, my direct messages saying, Cherotich, what is my billing doing? I am paying 1,000 shillings, I get 40 units. Tomorrow I pay 1,000 shillings, I get 45 units, and then I get 21 units. And this is all part and parcel of the process of confusing and confounding the electricity consumer to a space where he or she simply just pays, shuts up, and keeps moving, and hoping against hope that things will improve. You know, with all the clamor in 2018, His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, actually dropped our tariffs and said, we want to see a reduction in electricity tariffs. And what we ended up with was a system where if you consume less than 100 kilowatts per hour, kilowatt units per month, sorry, you will pay 10 shillings per kilowatt hour. But if you consume more than 100 units in a month, you will find yourself paying 15 shillings and 80 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, when you look at that, either 10 shillings or, and look, my power is, if I disappear, it's because
Okay, it seems we've lost Geratich. My video, please. Yes, it seems we've lost Geratich. We hope to be able to to have her rejoin us. I'd like to point out that Geratich is at the moment, you know, when activists, you know, engage in struggles for social justice, they often have to bear a lot of reprisals. And Geratich is currently under a gag order in terms of her you know, in one of the, in terms of her activities in the switch off KPLC movement. So she's quite constrained in what she can publicly say about the struggle to, you know, to make the Kenya Power more accountable to its customers. So as we wait for Geratich to rejoin us, I would like to, you know, greet some of the participants. I'm glad to see we've got people from around the world. So if there are things you haven't understood in terms of the Kenyan system, I know that there were things which were mentioned which are, you know, well known to Kenyans and may not be so well known to others. But as far as currency, understanding that, you can just roughly calculate that there are 100 Kenya shillings to the US dollar. I'm very happy to see my colleagues in the participants, and our chairman John Githongo. I've seen him active on Twitter. John is actually here. So John, if you would like to share a few words with the participants while we wait for Geratich to be able to rejoin us, if that will be possible. John?
No, thank you very much. As always, sorry, I am in a space that doesn't allow me to put on my camera but as always, you know, very powerful and profound and incisive commentary by David on this. You know, really, I think the most fundamental conclusion that has been made here is the fact that we are talking about Kenya has now reached the end of technical fixes to the fight to corruption. Kenya has got the most sophisticated legal and institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption in Africa. That's why Zambian MPs come to Kenya to learn how to fight corruption, because on paper, our systems are excellent. But what this really shows us, and I think is the next sort of phase of the battle against corruption, is this issue of political accountability. Here, what David has demonstrated is that the entire system is captured. And I think as we go forward in terms of doing our research and advocacy, it's moving it into this political realm. So kudos, David, kudos, AfriCOG, for putting this excellent report together.
Thank you very much, John. Now, I think in the audience we're joined by Martha Karua. the Honorable Martha Karua, who is the leader of the NARC Kenya party. So I think, Martha, if you'd wait a while, I'll give you the floor later, but I'd like to grab the opportunity that Gerotich is back online to allow her to finish her remarks. But welcome, Martha Karua. We're very, very pleased to have you here and others. Gerotich, if you'd like to continue, you have the floor now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, it's like I said, I could see the flickering of my lights and I knew that Kenya Power was going to fail me yet again. And this is a part of the struggle. How do you live your life on a daily basis? How do you run a small business? How do you participate in webinars? How do you live your life when you have unstable, dangerous, and unaffordable electricity? And as the Switch Off KPLC team, the Energy Justice 6, as we call ourselves, because it is myself and 5 other individuals who decided after October 2018 that we were not going to lie down and play dead just because some cases had been settled privately. We instead said we're going to continue to mobilize and galvanize all Kenyans to understand that energy and energy justice is their right. Now, when I listen to Dr. Ndii talk about issues of sustainable and clean energy in comparison, for example, to Lamu coal, one of the things we have done a lot is research into Lake Turkana wind power. And, you know, we talk about wind energy being clean energy, being free effectively because it's very windy in the north, one of the best sources of wind power that you could find anywhere on the continent of Africa. I have studied at length the Lake Turkana wind power project, and it has really boggled my mind how it is that even something as clean and sustainable as wind energy has gone dirty. You know, I read last week that Lake Turkana wind power made 11 billion shillings in 10 months alone. We're looking at a Lake Turkana wind power that is costing the taxpayer and the electricity consumer nothing less than 15 billion shillings in penalties. Penalties for what? Dr. Ndii talked about transmission. He talked about the transmission of electricity from the generation sites to substations, which is then eventually distributed and sold by Kenya Power to you and me. Now, with Lake Turkana wind power, what I have found and have not been able to understand is how 150,000 acres of land was allocated, that belonged to people, by the way, was allocated to this company. How this company was involved in the selection of the company that was meant to do the high voltage transmission from Loyangalani in the north down to Suswa. How this company, Lake Turkana Wind Power, was able to select a company that eventually went bankrupt, okay? And how Kenya Power, Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority, Ministry of Energy, and KETRACO were not able to call to order this decision made by Lake Turkana Wind Power. Subsequently, we're here celebrating clean energy, but the electricity consumer is not feeling the benefits. We are paying more and more. We are a country with geothermal, with wind, with solar, but we're talking about coal. And even when we talk about wind, wind is so riddled with chronic capitalists, with money laundering, with kickbackers, with all kinds of activities and shenanigans in the ministries, departments, and agencies that at the end of the day, the people who are supposed to benefit from energy are not benefiting. And you know, I have never seen a government that is incapable of not signing a loan agreement. Really, this government of Kenya has an insatiable appetite for loans. And when you look at the energy sector, we talk about loans taken out for transmission, for generation, et cetera, et cetera. I want to remind Kenyans that this is our money. So we have a double whammy as electricity consumers. The money that the government is committing to different projects, be it water, electricity, roads, and so on and so forth. That is our money. We, the taxpayers, own that money. But on top of that, as electricity consumers, we have tariffs to pay. So if we're not being hit one way, we are being hit the other way. And our agenda as the Energy Justice 6 and the Switch Off KPLC campaign is to jumpstart the middle class. Because, as Dr. Ndii explained, you have a situation where the last mile beneficiaries of electricity are not able to pay that 15,000, and they won't. So who is propping up the roof of corruption in the energy sector, if not the middle class who happen to be electricity consumers? And this is the objective of our campaign. We are saying, wake up, organize, mobilize yourselves. Engage in national conversation, international. We have a completely hamstrung, a touch a hair on the head on the energy sector. And whenever they do something here and there, you have a little light smacking of the wrist, but nothing that really improves the lot of the electricity consumer. So the objective of our campaign of Switch Off KPLC is to say, if we cannot find accountability, we're going to clamor for it, we're going to push for it. We had a demonstration last year. We delivered 3 petitions to the Chief Justice, to the Parliament, and to the Office of the President. Of course, we were dispersed, we were tear gassed, but we successfully delivered those petitions. We are asking Kenyans to get up and stand up for their rights. We cannot talk about unemployment. We cannot talk about housing. We cannot talk about industrialization if we do not look at the factors constraining the energy sector. And in ending, I think what I want to say is when Dr. Ndii talked about the least cost power development plan, it went from being a planning document to a looting blueprint, an oversupply tool. And as Dr. Ndii carefully explained to us, when you have a situation where we are buying more power than we actually need and than we actually use, we still pay for it. As electricity consumers, as taxpayers, we're paying for it. And when you look at the LCPDP, the 2017 to 2037 document, by 2037, they estimate that we'll be at about 10,000 megawatts. Mind you, we're looking right now at 2020, we're not even at 2,000. We can barely afford the 2,000. But at this point in time, we're paying for closer to 3,000-4,000 megawatts that we have ordered, we're drawing down on, and we are not using. And so when we approach the head of state, because I know today's the State of the Nation address, I said last week, I said, I would like the president to address the issue of electricity. This is the nerve center of the people of Kenya. And you know, one of the things we have said, and I say to the president repeatedly, is divest yourself of all and any interests you have in the electricity sector. This is all about crony capitalism. Take action on energy cartels. This amorphous, shady group of shadowy operatives that are bleeding billions out of our pockets every day. Enforce respect for the 4th schedule of the Constitution of Kenya. And stop acquiring and burdening Kenyans with foreign debt. This is something that we are asking the president to do, but somehow no sound is landing in the energy sector. However, where we have traction and movement is that the public is no longer ignorant. Before, we would crack jokes when electricity would go off. I think a couple of weeks ago, we had a nationwide blackout somewhere for a few hours. In the past, there would have been jokes, oh, let's light our candles, let's see what to do. But what I saw on social media was an outpouring of anger and an understanding that we are paying money for a shady Kenya Power that has stolen 150 billion shillings from itself over the past 15, 20 years. That is why nothing short of a complete forensic audit will do. And when we say switch off KPLC, we say switch off all the energy cartels. It's not just about KPLC, and we will not allow KPLC to be sacrificed on the altar of some agenda to protect the other shadowy operatives. KPLC is as corrupt as the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, as corrupt as KETRACO, as corrupt as the Ministry of Energy, and we are calling them out systematically. So my appeal to those who work in spaces of justice and social justice activism is never to forget that energy is at the heart of every single thing that we do. And if we can keep ourselves as the Kenyan population focused on issues of energy justice, perhaps we will break the back of corruption. And I do agree that this is a political issue. This is not simply a question of adhering to this or that procedure or ensuring that this or that policy is in place, because these policies are in place. We have good systems, we have good structures. They are violated. It is impunity. This is the existential threat that we face as the people of Kenya. And no better place do you see it than in the energy sector. So I thank you for this opportunity to hopefully maybe ground some of the figures and numbers and situations in the reality that Kenyan people face on a daily basis. And as I always say, switch off KPLC.
Thank you so much, Geritich, for that impassioned presentation on the struggle to corral and curb the misbehavior and criminality of KPLC and the individuals involved in these cartels. We will get a chance during the course of the discussion to hear the name of your other colleagues whom you mentioned. But for now, I would now like to open the floor to comments and inputs from the participants. We did want this to be a very interactive session. I think you've got enough here. You've gotten a broad view of the infrastructure sector and the way that choices have been distorted by by greed, you know, for corrupt gains and using those corrupt gains to gain and maintain political power. Looking at the 3 different sectors, we've heard horrendous figures being battered about how much has actually been programmed to be stolen from the budget. We have concluded that this is systemic. This is, you know, this kind of behavior is a culture, and it is a shared understanding amongst a large part of the elite. And it simply boggles the mind to understand how people interact in order to perpetuate this kind of misdoings. I had asked Martha Karua, who I'm very glad is joining us, to make a few remarks from the floor, and I'll now allow her to talk. And as we do that, Migai Akech, I see you've also joined us. Migai Akech, professor at the University of Nairobi, also working on democracy capture, would like to share a few remarks with us. So Martha, please, we'd like to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. May I salute AfriCOG for this very great report and Ndii for presentation, and Geritich, as usual, for the clarity. Are we still there?
Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would want to say that I personally encountered budgeted corruption when I was in government. I, of course, did not have that vocabulary of budgeted corruption, but I do remember going through the budget of the Ministry of Water in my first year in that ministry, that is for the 2003-2004 budget. There were small sums considering what is going on now, but you would see that every department is exaggerating some little figures for their takeaway home, whether it's through monitoring and evaluation, whether it is the cost of the project. And I would want to agree with Ndii that the projects are designed and the corruption is factored in the budget by way of exaggeration of the figures. And this is not in one department, but mainly all infrastructure projects are designed to siphon. Where a road is done, like the Thika Highway, the greatest motivator is the cut that those the cartels that have captured the government are going to get away with. And I've learned that sometimes, although something may be in the government development plans, those who push for factoring those projects in the budget are actually the cartels who have calculated what they're going to gain by having that project raised. And that's why we are seeing projects costing much more than they cost elsewhere. Like, I believe that our roads, our dams, our water projects are some of the most expensive, more than even in the developed world. At least the roads, I know that for sure. And the dams, from the figures I see burdened around, I know for sure. And I would say that those days when I was at water, I was able, through working with honest officers, to bring down the cost of drilling boreholes from 6 million to 1.5. And as soon as I left the ministry, they shot up again. I was still in government and at justice, and I was not able to get it to change. So what I would like to say is that the lessons of the report that is being launched is to just know that this corruption is government-wide because government is under capture. And unless those in government work to uproot the entire system, because it runs through government and is handed down to the next government. Remember, the civil service never really goes. And the drivers of this corruption, or the some of the key players, are in the high ranks of the civil service. They are the ones who will authorize the projects. They are the ones who will convince the politicians and co-opt them into the projects. But some politicians do come already seasoned and looking for these projects. So the question is, what can we as citizens do to end this type of thing? Because this is exactly how agro-leasing was designed. This is exactly how Goldenberg was designed, a pretended compensation, overcompensation system for purported gold exporters, and in agro-leasing, exaggerated purchase of communications equipment, police equipment, etc. I think the greatest issue we have now is how we can come up with a model that will help us to overcome these challenges. And I think it begins and ends with leadership. A leadership that will be ready to do a government-wide cleanup. It doesn't do for one department to be doing well, because that department can soon be taken over when the individuals move. So I would say we move now from the report to what else is it that we can do to have a government-wide cleanup. This is an eye-opener for this work to begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martha. And as you've heard, she knows exactly what she's speaking about, having been a minister in various ministries, among them water and justice and constitutional affairs. So thank you very much for that contribution and for offering ideas about a way forward and underlining the importance of leadership, which is, I think, the sort of conclusion that we are all coming to. I would like now to invite Migai Akech you now have the floor, Migai, for any comment you might wish to make.
Thank you very much, Gladwell. Thank you all for this very wonderful webinar. Thank you very much to Dr. Ndii for his illuminating paper. And so just to give you a brief background, I'm an academic. I specialize in public law with a bias to administrative law, which I've studied from the viewpoint of democracy theory. So I do quite a bit of work on, if you could call it the democratization experiment, particularly in our context. And it so happens that I am involved in a project on democracy capture in Africa that is being spearheaded by the Center for Democracy Development in Ghana. So I'd like to make remarks from that perspective. And my starting point would be Dr. Ndii's conclusions. And he rightly points out that the efficacy of a public financial management system is contingent on functional democracy and ultimately on the rule of law, and that it presupposes that the institutions work as they should, and that 3 decades into the transition from an authoritarian one-party state to a multi-party democracy, and well over a decade into a new progressive constitutional dispensation, Kenya's democratic transition is seriously imperiled. But from what I see, democracy was in Kenya was really never meant to succeed because it has always been captured. So I think state capture is just part of it. Facilitates democracy capture, facilitates state capture. It's a symbiotic relationship in many ways. But what are we by democracy capture? What are we referring to? In this project, we are looking at it in terms of democracy being actively and systematically targeted and captured to serve agendas, projects, and interests that distort, diminish, and undermine its capacity and effectiveness to address and satisfy the everyday needs and expectations of citizens. And from that perspective, democracy capture then is about the capture not only of the democratic system, but also the institutions, the processes, and the actors that ordinarily define, constitute, and legitimize a political system as democratic. So as I see, democracy capture then is much more insidious than state capture. Of course, it is state capture then enables democracy capture, and in more practical terms, democracy capture entails the distortion of democracy, with the result that 1, citizens do not actually choose their governance. Number 2, citizens do not participate meaningfully in governance. Number 3, citizens do not hold their governance accountable, even where elections are a regular ritual, as in our case. And these departures from normative democratic governance occur, particularly where a cohort of powerful actors, and these powerful actors are situated in and out of the state, and they manage to capture the processes of democracy and ensure that they primarily serve their private interests. And in that scheme, elections are never free nor fair, but are nonetheless considered important for conferring regime legitimacy. Again, although the result, governments hardly deliver public goods due to, for example, to state capture, as we have learned today, the democracy capturers are very good at containing the citizenry. And they do that by, among other things, manipulating the social characteristics of the citizenry, including ethnicity in our context. And what do I see in terms of the manifestations of democracy capture in our context? It's taken the form predominantly of the manipulation of the electoral process.
I'd like to ask you to sort of summarize your remarks, because we're running quite short on time. And I mean, it's fascinating what you're telling us, and enough material for an entire lecture. If you could sort of sum up your conclusions, we'd be grateful.
Yes. So in sum, I think it's important that we study more carefully state capture, democracy capture, but in terms of figuring out how do we rescue the democracy or the democratization process in our context, because from what I see, democracy will not thrive while the infrastructure for its capture remains intact. And so our priority must be to dismantle that infrastructure. And there are a number of ways to do it in the longer term. You can be thinking in terms of judicial review action. You can be thinking of entrenching devolution and other mechanisms for distributing economic and political power, which, because these in the fullness of time could help to dismantle the democracy capture infrastructure. And that way you begin to create room for more inclusive, transparent, and accountable governance, because that for me is the only way to deal with both phenomena, whether you're talking about democracy capture or you're talking about state capture. Thank you very much, Gladwell.
Thank you so much, Ndii, for those insightful comments. And obviously the remedies you name, you know, in terms of dismantling the infrastructure of capture, entrenching devolution, etc. All of these would have to take place in a context of struggle, where we're struggling to protect the Constitution, and others are struggling to undermine it. So thank you very much for your remarks. I think, do people have the facility to raise their hand if they would like to say something? Is that possible? Otherwise, I will read from some of the comments that we've gotten so far. And after doing that, I think I'll take we'll check the temperature on how much longer we can go on. Raz Nawara, a journalist and writer. Thanks, David, for unpacking what has confounded so many Kenyans. And her question, which she says is perhaps a naive one, is that President Uhuru Kenyatta has been harping on about being the leader who will kill corruption in Kenya. His empowerment of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the many cases in court, are they there to confuse Kenyans, or what's going on? What's your assessment? David, would you care to respond to that, or shall we throw it to the floor?
I'll be quick on that one. I think this idea of fighting corruption as prosecution of corrupt people who are caught is a very narrow one and not a useful one. Because I think what this report is showing is that you've got an architecture, the whole idea of budgeted corruption. There's a process which should ensure that only sort of viable and well-costed projects are actually funded. It is possible to do this kind of corruption and not get anybody actually being prosecuted. I'll give you a case in point. The railway. We don't know, we know that the railway probably, I did my own bit of math only on the BQ, because all the things used to build the railway, you can actually buy them on Alibaba. They're there and they are priced. So you can actually do a back of the envelope BQ. And if you look at just materials and civil works, that railway shouldn't cost, using Chinese sort of retail prices of the same things, shouldn't have cost more than 500 million shillings in terms of the civil work. So you're talking about overpricing, probably which could go up to 4 or 5 times. I raised these issues very early on, as you know, Gladwell, you are part of that. We raised these issues, not just about pricing, but many things about the railway. I saw, if you read the transport committee report, the PS, whether what they report is correctly lied about a feasibility study, about the rates of return, both financial and return. So if you just do a case study of that railway, that was a budgeted corruption. It was pushed through with a lot of political power behind it. Parliament rubber stamped it. And it is now, obviously, all the things that we said have come to pass. I saw that this week or thereafter, it's been disclosed that Kenya Railways lost 24 billion shillings. Yeah. So this year. So that's the scale of things that we are talking about. And just capturing a few groups and whether they are prosecuted or not really is not what we are talking about. We're really talking about the whole entire public financial management architecture that can see the country incur in one project a debt equivalent to 5% of GDP and get nothing out of that project. And this goes through the entire process, goes through is sort of a lot of political support. Critics are sort of shut down, and now the whole country is in buyer's remorse, but there you are, and nobody will ever be prosecuted for having done something wrong with this railway. It's highly unlikely. So I would like to sort of, we're trying to change focus from saying that a certain, how many crooks have been caught and prosecuted for little things, to asking about just the kind of corruption that's actually bringing down the country economically. And that's being done from the level of the man who's talking about it. I mean, he's behind this railway. So in terms of political accountability, Uhuru bears full political accountability for the economic damage done to this country by this railway, among other things. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. I've noticed one hand up. Let me just get an idea of how much more time people have. Could we spend another 10 minutes or so? Are the panelists in order with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we have a Martin Goni who has his hand up. Martin, please introduce yourself and give us a very brief question or comment, please. Sorry, we're not getting you, so I'll move to the next person who has.
Are you hearing me?
Okay, no, yeah.
We can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm very thankful for the discussion that you guys are having.
Thank you.
My name is Martin. I'm formerly a student from Ohio State University. Currently, it's very saddening. I've had the entire discussion from Ndii, Cherotich, and I'm really concerned as a youth, you know, because we are the ones that are going to bear the burden of all these very useless debts that we've been taking from every corner of the world. Everything that the government has put a hand on in terms of development has either been a corruption scandal or it never came to fruition. And I think it's about time that we have like every sober-minded individual to rise up to the occasion and call the government to action and call the government to total order. Because what is happening is that we have a bunch of individuals, especially well-positioned in the government, and whose entire intention is that they want to rob this country to the core. And nobody's really standing up and really asking each and every individual to look at what is happening. It's unfortunate that we have the Kenyan media has also been brought on board, and all of them, they are just witnessing everything that is happening. We like to call them the fourth estate, but actually we are on our own. And I'm really glad that we have very intellectuals like Dr. Ndii, Cherotich, who are really standing up. We have people like Dr. Martha Karua, Boniface Mwangi, who are really the voice of activism in this country, while the rest of us are just sitting down and I think it's about time we, as the young people, could be able to sit down with you guys, because the issue is that we don't have a platform. If I wanted to meet somebody like Ndii, I'll find a little bit hard to get him, and so that, you know, we need the energy, because, you know, sometimes that when you
have the energy, I doubt anyone else can give you the energy. You're the youth. So thank you very much. You're pointing out that the youth will have the burden. I mean, the burden of this falls upon them. But at the same time, the future is yours, and it is your responsibility to take up that challenge and try and do what you can in your own circle. And by doing that, I think things will grow, just like you see Gerotich say and her colleagues picking up a real problem, deciding to do something about it. And with action grows experience, grows courage, grows voice. And you know, I would like to encourage you and all other young people not to give up and not to feel that you don't have anything to say. The future lies in your hands. Thank you.
Karua, can I?
Yes, please.
You have another question?
No, you just go ahead, and then we'll go back.
Okay, I would say there were a couple of questions which I think would be useful if we just made a comment on them. Yes. on the screens, which are for the benefit of everyone. Yes. There's a question from Fred Munyua, who is asking about how far can the Office of the Auditor General go towards exposing this deep-seated corruption, and said about OCO did the exposure, but that doesn't seem to be bad. I think it's important to say that the PFM is an architecture, and one cog of the wheel alone is not sufficient. The Auditor General, as you said, is an officer of Parliament, actually. They report to Parliament. Once they do the audit, it goes to Parliament. It has to be adopted by the Public Accounts Committee. And it's actually the Public Accounts Committee report that can actually be acted on, not the Auditor General's report. So if Parliament does not play its role, the Auditor General actually cannot actually do anything on their own. It's actually instrumentalized through the Public Accounts Committee reports. Parliament can actually ask the Auditor General to do special audits and that kind of thing. But one thing I think we could do better, our Auditor General can do, we can think about doing better, is to do more value for money audits. Right now, what we're doing is statutory financial audits. I know that if you look at the history of the US public financial oversight, the Government Accountability Office used to do what our Auditor General does, which is financial accountability. And they have since stopped doing that. They farmed out that to private auditors because it's just statutory audit. And now the Government Accountability Office, which is an office in Congress, basically does what you might call forensic audits and value for money audits on specific things, and to bring them to the attention of Congress. So there could still be, whether once we did that would itself sort of make a difference. I think you have to bear in mind that what you're dealing with is impunity. Yeah? And I think we have to confront the impunity. There's a question from Seema saying that how we conclude by saying that unconventional reform really wouldn't cut it. And she asked a question of what would unconventional reform look like. Clearly it's political, we have said. And I think one of the areas that I think has potential is devolution, which we need to do very radically. And the way to see that is if you look at state capture, it's highly centralized. And you kind of think of the re-centralization. What Jubilee government, which is the one which has really ramped up this sort of state repurposing of the public financial management system, has been doing at the same time, is re-centralizing. I think if you look at the case of health equipment, which has turned out to be a complete scandal, they actually went against the constitution, usurped the responsibility of county government so that they could procure these medical equipment centrally, most of it which is now dead stock, about 60 billion shillings worth. So the fight for decentralization is in part the fight back of the cartels, wanting to keep control Because, and it's similar to what I'm talking about, the road portfolio shifting to huge projects. You can see the center wants to do big projects. So it stands to reason that if you devolve and the money is diffused and it's doing small projects, then just the transactions cost of trying to capture a very decentralized system, I think, is much higher. A centralized system has a single point of capture. A decentralized system has multiple points. The transactions costs are high. If you're running around the 47 counties or even below that, trying to rig 200 contracts, it's a lot harder work than if you can just put it all together in one big health equipment procurement and you deal that with 2 or 3 big companies, or if you look at the sort of things we have seen in KEMSA lately, if it was decentralized so that it can be rooted. So I think a very radical devolution this can be one of the justifications we can make for very, very radical devolution of many, many things. Because I actually don't think that we're this argument that we need big national projects, I think the cost far outweighs the benefits of the scale of projects that we are seeing.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, David. I'm just going to allow 3 more contributions. I have George Kigoro and Pasi Amayo lined up, and Sheila Masinde. George, if you still would like to speak, you can speak now.
Whatever they
say.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, George. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Gladwell. Good to see you, and thank you very much, David and Geroteach, for a very fascinating presentation, and AfriCOG for putting this together and following up with the first one. I just wanted to make the little point about how the mechanics that have been used to perpetuate capture, and I was talking to a common colleague, the former internal auditor, and he was pointing out and flagging the attention to how budgeting decisions have been made, so that the standard budget usually is undramatic, and what increasingly happens is that all the budgeted corruption is increasingly being put in the supplementaries. And the idea that traditionally in the early years there used to be only one supplementary budget, but the financial discipline has grown into more and more supplementaries. I mean, more than one supplementary budget during the financial cycle, and this has much less scrutiny, legislative scrutiny. And this is where a lot of that is, a lot of the budgeted corruption is being packed into. So just to flag that issue as sort of an important way of understanding the mechanics for how this is achieved, that it isn't necessarily done in one fell swoop. That's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, George. And indeed, the role of bureaucrats who understand so well how the system works in advising how to circumvent that system. I wonder if the moderators could help me find Pasi Amayo. He had his hand up, or she had her hand up. Sorry, I don't know. And if they could allow him or her to talk.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. So I'm a lady and my name is Pasi Amayo. I am from Kenya. I work with the Society for International Development and I am leading the Sustainable Energy Futures Project in Eastern Africa. I am also the regional focal point at the SDG 7 Youth Constituency to the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. And I have 2 comments that can also be questions. And I'll start with one that addresses what Martin was kind of talking about. And thank you so much, Gladwell, for telling my colleague Martin and that it is up to us young people to take up the mantle and do what we need to do to ensure that we are able to achieve a sustainable energy future for ourselves in this country and in this region. And I want to welcome Martin to join the SDG 7 Youth Constituency to the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, where we are able to, where we build each other's capacity, but are also heavily involved in informing policy at the regional and global level, and now looking to even inform energy policies at the national level. So that is my first comment. My second comment is in regards to what Gerald Teach was talking about. It is a time for the middle class to rise up and get involved as consumers, and not even just the middle class, the entire public. In my experience working around the sustainable energy futures work in Eastern Africa, when we started, I asked myself, and we asked ourselves as a project, why aren't the public involved in some of these energy issues that should be benefiting their lives as consumers? And one of the things that came to mind was the fact that we're being told that the sector, energy, climate sector, extractives, is dominated by technicians, technocrats, and scientists who use hard language and jargon that the public easily ignore as they go through their daily lives. So we said there is a need for us within the sector, the experts, to begin to simplify some of this language so that the public can easily engage with it as they move forward. But then, despite that, there is also an opportunity for citizens to pick up the mantle and become active citizens in joining public consultations, in understanding our policies, in interrogating even these reports that civil society organizations such as AfriCOG, SID, among others, publish for the benefit of building their competency and knowledge bank to be able to engage. And perhaps also just to ask our well-able speakers here, David Ndii, Gerald Teach, and even you, Gladwell Otieno, what else can we do to inspire or influence the public to begin to take up the mantle, to say it is our right to have energy, especially because energy is at the heart of sustainable development. It is at the heart of everything we do, from health, education, food security, name it. How else can we ensure that the public is heavily engaged and ready to fight for a sustainable energy future for us all? Thank you, Gladwell.
I think Gerald Teach will be well able to answer that in the final round, but thank you very, very much for your engagement. Sheila Masinde, from the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Gladwell. Thank you, Dr. Ndii and Gerald Teach for another great report. I think for me, what comes to mind, especially just after listening to Gerald Teach, is just the need to break down this discourse. I think the sectors that you have touched on, of course, as you and the previous speaker, Pasi, has mentioned, are really at the heart of our of the economy, and really drivers in terms of economic enhancement and so on. But how do we break down the effects of corruption in these sectors? And I really appreciate the effort taken by Dr. Ndii. The figures, they're all mind-boggling. But how do you, just enhance this discourse among Kenyans? So I think there's a need to just break down the effects of corruption in these sectors. I like what Gerald Teach brought in, the question of quality and value for money achieved from some of these projects, just looking at the energy sector. And, she even mentioned, cases of individual families being affected, by faulty transmission line installations and other cases. So I think we need to just greatly demonstrate, and that's what we've been trying to do, the extent of corruption as affects, the standards of living, just basic safety for Kenyans. And my other thought, I think, is really around, how do we jumpstart this conversation among all, stratas of the Kenyan society? And I agree, yes, we need to bring it to that political accountability realm, but how do we also ensure that, citizens, we place power into citizens' hands to be able to deal with this issue, great issue around budgeted corruption? the Office of the Auditor General is seeking to embed, a citizen audit accountability approach in its audit processes. Maybe my question to Dr. Ndii is, to what extent do you think, and I think he's kind of touched on it when he's talked about value for money, do you think that this is an approach we can also take up in other PFM institutions, such as the Office of the Controller of Budgets, to involve citizens? How do we embed social accountability approaches, like social audits, public expenditure tracking efforts to enhance public participation, to improve efficiency in the resource utilization, and also just enhance value for money? So really, I think I would like to see how we engage consumers, we engage citizens in a more enhanced way to be able to tackle this great issue of budgeted corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila Masinde. I think now we'll wrap up and come back to the panelists. There have been a lot of important points made. We've heard a lot of perspectives and a lot of valuable perspectives from various areas, from people who have experience in the public sector, people with long experience in civil society fighting for accountability. And so I think we'll come back to the panelists, but before that, we'll just scan the Q&A to see if there's anything that we might want to address as we conclude. There's a small mention of the COVID-19, manifesting the core of the matter of this discussion of highway robbery. Can we really fight the pandemic with this mentality is a question. I think that feeds generally into the sort of general findings of the sort of mayhem and larceny which is rife in all sectors. David touched on the central government's usurping the right of counties to cater for their health needs as they see fit by buying equipment, because obviously there's more to be gained from buying equipment than from perhaps providing prenatal care to mothers, etc. So we take that point. A lack of access to information. David talked about the fact that the public debt register has not been made public and is only made public when it's too late for us to do anything about it. And there's another comment. Well, there's one that seeks to understand, I think, the psychology behind the individuals who belong to cartels. Are these people captured too within a system, rather than us imagining these as people who just seek money and in essence greedy people? Is there something behind this? I imagine it's a bit of both. There's a lot of greedy people out there, and there's a lot of people who start out with good intentions and end up being trapped and ultimately enthusiastically going along. I think, thanks for all the compliments on the presentations. You answered Sima's question about conventional reform, the limits of conventional reform. I think now we shall thank the participants for their participation, hand back to the floor, and have a launch of the report and then close. And as you continue tweeting, please remember to be using the hashtag highway robbery KE. Thank you very much. So I'll hand back first to Geothermal and then to David for their final remarks.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the comments. And I also want to underscore what Razna had said earlier on, that actually for this petition 6 for the Switch Off KPLC campaign, at least 600 plus people shared emails of their trials and tribulations related to Kenya Power. So this is a joint effort. So although Switch Off KPLC is run by 6 people who continue to volunteer, this really is a public interest matter and has a class action feel about it. Another thing, and just to reflect on what Pasi said, I think there's a lot of middle class embarrassment when it comes to issues of social justice fights. Is it because maybe some of them are also enjoying the trickle-down effects of some of these contracts that Dr. Ndii has talked about and the budgeted for corruption. And maybe sectors of the middle class are saying, you know, we can't really find ourselves fighting too vocally about this. Let's leave demonstrations and action to young, unemployed people who are fodder for police bullets if we end up demonstrating, and so on and so forth. And what I'm trying to tell the middle class is this is actually a fight for our lives. This is the fight for our lives. And this is a moment where if you are utterly curtailed and hampered, I spent more than 300,000 shillings on electricity in 1 year. That type of money is money that should be spent elsewhere. And because you have the pay first and ask questions later, we are all stuck continuing to fund this cycle of corruption. I would urge young people, whether you're in the middle class or not, I'm not a young person, I left that category a little while ago. I would encourage young people and older people alike to understand that keeping quiet about energy injustice is not going to help you. And I also tend to agree with Dr. Ndii that, you know, just wanting people to be jailed is not going to be the answer alone. In fact, from all the strategic litigation we're involved in, we can see that a lot of muck will be thrown at these cases. There will be obfuscation forever. Nobody will end up in jail. That is not the solution. The solution for me is to push for policy action. For example, the cutting of capacity charges by 50%. That will make it less attractive. Energy costs should be cut. The tariffs should be cut by 10%. More players in the open tender systems, development of private and modular refineries, all kinds of things that would enhance the open space of competition. And to add to what somebody was asking, one of the attendees was asking, they said, can counties manage electricity? In the fourth schedule, the answer is yes. In the fourth schedule of the Constitution, reticulation of utilities, including water and electricity, fall within the remit of the county, which means, for example, that Marsabit County, which houses Lake Turkana Wind Power, has a right to determine how it reticulates its utilities, how it handles electricity, how it handles water. And if every county is able to say, here, we prefer to use solar, or this is what we want to do, or this is who we want to buy our power from, which brings me to my final point, that we need to liberalize this sector. We need to end the monopoly. Even if counties were to manage their electricity, if counties were to manage how they distribute and sell it, they still are stuck with one de facto monopoly, that is Kenya Power. This is what we need to bring to an end. We need to end the de facto monopoly. We need to allow firms to compete. This is healthy. You know, we need to have auctions, but not so that we circumvent procurement procedures, but so that we can identify viable firms. In the North and the West, you can pick and choose who your utility company is, depending on the price that they're giving you. In Kenya, we do not have that kind of choice. And this is what we're pushing for. If you broke down this monopoly, that is Kenya Power, and we will have other companies come up and they will compete. It will be healthy. We will see the price of our electricity go down, notwithstanding the juggernaut and the inertia that corruption currently is in Kenya. That will take far more than just addressing the energy sector to deal with. But what I'm saying is we need to move more into a solution-oriented way, but it has to be a simultaneity of action. So we are educating, we're advocating, we're informing, we're urging people to stand up and speak up and out. Hold your legislators to task. You elected them and they say nothing about your electricity. But at the same time, we engage in strategic litigation and also pushing for policy transformation. So it's a plethora of things, but we have to simplify our language. And for all of those who are saying, why are we calling them cartels? I 100% agree with you. Whatever they are, whether they're ministries, boards, agencies, departments, money launderers, they're all thieves. And when we simplify the language and we call them thieves, whether you're a junior thief, a mid-level thief, a senior thief, we must call you what you are. And we need to keep spreading this message, and we need to keep reminding people that energy is a human rights issue. And if we're going to economically survive as the people of Kenya, we need to be able to afford electricity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cherotich. And now I hand over to David for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Gladwell. I'll begin with an anecdote. About a decade ago or more, I sort of did a study tour of looking at legislative oversight of the budgets in the US, and went to several states, I think at least 15 states, and legislative offices and cities and circles. And then some of that is actually what ended up informing the work we did on the Constitution. I remember going to the office of the legislative analyst in California. This is the office equivalent to a public parliamentary budget office. And she gave me these reports. I still keep them. That's why I was looking for them. This report, let me see whether you can see it, its size. This is the report to the legislative, to the state assembly, done by the budget analyst of the state assembly for one budget year for 2007 and 8. Yeah, it's sort of two thick volume and a summary. And the point was that she says, I do one of these every year, and they don't read it. You know, it doesn't have any effect. So the point was, and that was one of the strongest and best established sort of parliamentary budget offices, state offices. So what a point am I making is that, but by contrast, what I found throughout the US and in particularly was just how many independent civic initiatives on very specific aspects of the budget exist in every state, not just legislative, not just national budget, in every state. There is a think tank which just scrutinizes the budget on veterans. There is one which just looks at the budget for firemen and all sorts of things. What sort of GeoTeach is doing, there is at least sort of 2 or 3 GeoTeachs in every county, and counties below the state, sort of championing one thing or another. So I think one of the things that we need to do is to stop focusing so much on official institutions. That's what I'm trying to say. I think we have this word participation. My take on it is that it has become synonymous with validation. People want to participate, they want to be part of the process, but really what they're doing is validation. I think we have too much sort of cooperation with government, too little protest, we are too trusting. Kenyans, I think the Kenyan middle class particularly, they are too trusting of the government. I think there's a huge contrast I found particularly with the US. They mistrust everything that the government does. Every number the government writes is mistrusted, checked, verified. So we need to trust government less. And I think it's Gladwell who likes to say more than anybody else that eternal vigilance is the price you pay for liberty. We've seen very successful cases. What we should be doing, GeoTeach, what she's doing is obviously one of them. The people of Lamu stopped the Lamu coal plant, and this was cooperation between experts, local people, very sophisticated. They managed to do to very sophisticated public interest litigation. Some friends have been sort of supporting, have won partial battle on the SGR. They managed to get the take or pay, the thing forcing freight onto the SGR. They've managed to get that lifted. They haven't managed they didn't manage to get a judgment in favor of the port being managed by the county, because declared a county function as it is in the Constitution. And I think they're probably planning to appeal. I think they should. So litigation, things like that, which are more confrontational. I think in the 90s, when we were young people and we started these things, the IEA, some of these things we are doing, we were a lot more confrontational with government. I see young people wanting to be a lot more, I don't know whether they want to be included, to not to be seen as radical or whatever. I think something like the issue that GeoTeach raised about Lake Turkana and the land ownership question. to do with the electrical and wind power, the Turkana wind power project. That's something that I think should be taken up as a social justice issue by activists. So I think, because the takeaway here, I'm focusing on people are going to go away asking themselves, what can I do? Because not what should institutions do. As I said, institutions are captured. So what can we do to get them uncaptured? And I think what the citizens can do is a lot more activism around public finance, around our money. We're doing activism on other things. You see a lot of activism, very important on issues like extrajudicial killings and other very important human rights in particular. We need as much activism around public finance. I think that's what citizens should be able to do, starting at the county level, looking at national level, looking at specific projects. There's a lot of activism around, for instance, the new proposed expressway on issues of environment and cutting down trees, but not the fact that that thing is a complete fraud. The whole thing is a complete fraud. There isn't that much activism asking, do we need this thing? Did it go through the process? The public finance process, it didn't. Is anybody scrutinizing? Are we scrutinizing the small print in that PPP contract? I know that the other day there was this thing that Huru was going to sign in France. I understand he didn't sign it for some reasons that I don't know what happened when I got there. But I just looked at it. I had an altercation with one of the fellows in State House, and I just did a very, very small sort of Twitter thread on it, showing how actually it is also another complete fraud. These most PPPs are frauds. PPPs are frauds. You can take that as your starting point and prove it that they are not by demonstration, but it's doubtful. So yes, I think that's also something, that project like that, even before it takes off. But I am afraid the Kenyan middle class is very frustrating because they think all these mega projects are good things. So you see people saying, oh, a dual carriageway to Western Kenya is a wonderful thing. Why are you fighting it? Yeah, so I think citizens we need more skeptical citizens. We need a lot more activism and people running around. So I said, at the local level, national budgets, specific projects and programs and activities. That I think is what ultimately will uncapture the system by very serious scrutiny and also calling out people who are involved in this very, very directly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David, for thank you very much for those words. And I really think, people do have to have that much faith that they can come from being, little small Joe Blow who thinks they can't do anything, and then getting angry about a thing and finding out as much as you can do about it and making noise about it. It's not rocket science. And in this, of course, a lot of it is you have to put in the work to understand what's going on. But in this day and age, we have access to so much in terms of information and also support from groups who already have been working on these issues for a long time. So I would urge everyone, especially the young people who are listening, to take this to heart and become skeptical about government. Don't believe what they tell you until you've checked it, and become more active. So as we come to a close, we will be providing a link, I believe, to the report, which will be put up. And the report will be up on our website, and you can download it from there. And we can also send it by email to, yes, the report, the link has been put up already. And anybody who would like, you know, a PDF sent by email, they can obviously ask for that. We'd gladly forward it to them. We'll also be producing hard copies of the report, which can be mailed to you, or which can be collected from our offices. An email to the email address admin@africog.org. We'll see you then being sent a hard copy of the report if you would so like. So in closing, I'd like to thank everyone for having attended this meeting. I think at some point we had, I suspect, about 130 participants. I wasn't following the numbers as closely. Correct me if I'm wrong, moderators. You know, these reports do take a great deal of time and energy and resources to produce, but we intend to continue. We have started a project which is being supported by the OSF Africa Regional Office, looking at state capture, not just in the Kenyan context, but in other African countries as well. And we look forward to working with you and many others in continuing to uncover the operations and machinations of state capture, and understanding how we as civil society around the continent and indeed around the world can most effectively work together to counter capture in all its manifestations across all the areas that we work in and live in. So I want to thank you very much for this. Thank the team, Christos, Anyona, Anushka, Lucy, for the hard work. Many, many thanks to Inuka, Kenya, Maskani, Taifa, who are busy tweeting away, live tweeting, and John Kivongo, our chair, and to our members of the board. Charles Wangoho was here, and to the rest, I'm not sure if they attended, but many thanks to the board of directors of AfriCOG, Fumi Olonishaki, Maina Kiai, Don Dea, Charles Wangoho, who attended, Stella Chege. Thank you very much for your support to us. So once again, thank you all, and the report will be available on our website, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much to Geothermal for coming in and giving her impassioned and well-informed and well-founded contribution to us. And thanks once again to David Ndii for the work on this report and for the illuminating work that he always does on uncovering the relationships and the connections in trying to understand the structures of impunity against which we fought to defeat for so long. So thank you very much for your enlightening contribution. Okay, so that's it. That'll be it from me.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.